Hey, hi there. My name is Neil Christiansen, and welcome back to another episode of the Mile High Market Talk podcast, where we bring local professionals to the stage to have them share their expertise and to educate those who are looking to build overall wealth. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the difference between a move-in ready versus a fix-up house. The buyers that are out there right now, what would they prefer? I wrote a post on this through my newsletter about a month ago, and there was a lot of activity that came from it. A lot of people were having some conversation. They wanted to know a little bit more about it. So we thought, hey, let's bring on an expert who deals in this stuff on a daily basis and see if we can provide some information for that particular buyer as well as the seller so that they can continue to make good decisions as they get ready for either a purchase or a sale of real estate. I'm super excited today. Brian Clodius with the Clodius and Company. He and I have been doing business for quite some time. Brian's been in the real estate gig for about 15 years. Prior to that, he was in the financial sector. And what I like about Brian is that he really can bring not only that tangible piece that a lot of real estate agents can bring. Here, this house looks great. It's in great location. The bedrooms, everything's ready for the open house. But he also can have that conversation with the client from a financial perspective. And that's pretty rare. So super excited for Brian to be a guest here. And without further ado, Brian, how's it going today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's nice to be able to share with the public some of the conversations that we've had. We've known each other for over a decade plus. So it's nice to kind of put it on a podcast and get it out to the public.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that some of these examples that you share, I can kind of tongue in cheek kind of laugh about it because maybe I know about some of these particular examples since we've been doing this for quite some time together. So we'll just dive right into it. We've got a couple questions, 3 questions that we're going to review with a key takeaway from each. And then if there's, any questions, we'd love to hear some comments from you guys. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. We'd really appreciate that. So first question is, okay, we've got the buyer. The market has changed here in Colorado. Today is the 12th of August, 2026, and it's just a different environment. It's not what it was back in the pandemic where, homes were going off the market relatively quick. These days, buyers have the opportunity to kind of, dig in their heels and wait for the right house. That being said, there's basically 2 types of buyers that are out there right now. There's the move-in ready, meaning that they would love to just move into that house and not do a thing. And then there's the fixer-upper, meaning that they've got the skills and so forth to grab a good deal, but then have to do some of the work in order to make it their home. So Brian, let's talk about that and see if you can share, maybe an example of a move up type buyer and then an example of a fixer upper.
Absolutely. So you have areas that I generally want to go over with clients of making sure that they understand that what I'm bringing to the table, that these areas are going to be covered, whether we're talking about a budget, understanding their timeline, the financing it's going to take to be able to do a fixer upper, and then understanding their overall risk tolerance, right? And so what I bring to the table is being able to map out exactly what that's going to look like. So when you bring clarity to the conversation, then it allows those buyers to make a decision, whether it's a fixer upper or a move-in ready. For example, I've had a couple of buyers in the past that, their motivations are different. And so I look to make sure that I align myself with those motivations. For example, you have folks that bought a property early part of the year in Parker. And he's in a different stage of his life in which he's now a father of 2 young kids, and they're professionals. They have a very strict schedule. So timeline, and schedule is very strict. And so we're making sure that we align ourselves with that model. And we found a new build. That new build obviously has no fixing up to do. There's a segmented time frame of when the home is going to be done within a certain category of a few months when we're dealing with new builds. But we're aligning the type of purchase and the style and the lack of risk going into a new build. And that's their personality. And so making sure that we give them the information they need. They feel comfortable about the risk of a new build, having proper inspection and what have you. But that worked really well because this is a repeat buyer. I sold his own old home when he was a single guy, and now he's a family of two. And so motivations are different. And so it's making sure that we change up how we do things and we align ourselves with the type of property that's going to work for them.
Mm-hmm.
I can go into another example as far as individuals that they're in a different stage of their life and they're up in Brighton. And the motivation was to find a separate property in the same neighborhood that had an outbuilding, right? That was the motivation. That was the key. So we found another property that has the outbuilding, but the rest of the home needed renovation. Well, they're in a certain category of life in which they have the funds to be able to do that renovation.
Mm-hmm.
I provided contractors for them to get bids as to what's needed within the home. That's another point I'd like to make, is that I've done this for 15 years. And so what's interesting about that is I've gone through a few different servicers that have worked well, have not worked well, moving the needle a little bit as far as the amount of professionalism, talent, communication of these servicers, so that I'm providing a service to my buyers and sellers, for it to be an easy experience and
Mm-hmm.
that they can rely on the information that I'm giving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, those are two good examples. One from, he was a young guy. He probably had some time to maybe do some of the fixer-upper type stuff if that was the type of house that he originally purchased. But then you get a couple of kids, you don't have a lot of time to do a lot of these, more bigger projects, if you will. And so the new build made a lot more sense. And then, like you said, that these other folks, they just had the funds. So whether they were going to choose to do some of the activities or projects, they also probably were comfortable hiring somebody to kind of do that stuff for that house. Like you say, it all depends on the motivation of that buyer. Where are they at in life, I think makes a big decision, as well as from a financial standpoint. I speak to a lot of buyers that would love to get into that fixer upper because usually they have a better price than a move-in ready type home. But when you start to have that conversation about what that means, just even purely from a loan standpoint, whether it's a construction to perm type loan or a renovation type loan, that motivation starts to either show that, hey, I'm still in it, I still want to do this, which is great, but it also might actually say, maybe I should start looking at more of a move-in ready. I didn't realize that this was going to be this, much of a challenge, if you will, on that.
And what's really nice about this too is that, listen, we are wanting to open up the book and create clarity, right? We're wanting to be able to give folks an outline of exactly what choice and what does that look like depending on their choice. And so I've been able to ride your coattails with the videos that you provide your buyers of options, right? Everybody wants options. So you do videos of, 3 or 4 different options that do tailoring what type of loan is going to work for them. And also for them to realize that living monthly payment and understanding that, okay, there's a comfort level that you outline for your buyers to understand why they can have the comfort to move forward. And so that's been a huge compliment for my conversations that I have with my buyers and being able to get them to the next stage. And what's nice is that we don't control the decision. It's
Right.
fine. Whatever decision that someone made, that's fine. Our job is to make sure that we've provided the information, they feel good about what they've received, and it's professionals that have been doing this for a long time. And we're our name and our confidence level behind the information that we're giving,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we do this every day, loans and real estate. Typically, people are not doing this every day. They do it maybe 7 every 10 years. So, as much as they think that they can go in and fix a house and so forth, once you sit down and say, hey, have a conversation with the general contractor, like I said, that motivation could change. And they might just say, this is going to be just too much. So, that's our job, is to make sure that we're providing them with the right people to have those conversations as well as the options. And I think that's what a lot of people would prefer, especially in today's market.
Right. And, to dial down too, if we're looking at areas that, what is it I need to know for me to be able to make a comfortable decision? We're looking at the budget. We're looking at the timing. We're looking at your risk tolerance. We're looking at a construction bid, and then we're outlining these categories. And then someone's like, okay, I actually have a good understanding of the decision that I'm making, and it just allows them to move forward. Right.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
while that's a lot of work and background, but it's key areas that we've developed to be able to provide that. And then we can feel good about, whatever decision they make.
Yeah. So two really good examples of, someone who was motivated to go into a move-in ready house, in this case, a new build. And that's not to say that you can't find a move-in ready house on the resale channel, because you can. There's a lot of people that are making sure that their house is in a good place from a aesthetic standpoint so that people still can, consider that as opposed to just a new build. And then also someone who their motivation was that they wanted something different on the property, which was this outbuilding, and then they were willing to kind of take on some of the other tasks and projects to make that their new house the right house, if you will, for long term perspective.
Yeah, I could go on and on as far as different circumstances. I'm thinking about a family that they're near retirement age, and so the budget is solid, and it all was about location. And so they wanted to position themselves just outside of Boulder so that they're living a little bit more of the quiet lifestyle with acreage, but they're only about 15 minutes out. And
Hmm.
so we found, in the Sugarloaf area, property in which it was all about the feel of the home and aligning the location of that property so that they could still have a lifestyle week to week in which they're going in and they're enjoying the nightlife and the restaurants and dinners and whatnot with their friends. And they were also willing to go ahead and take on projects that had to be done to the home. And then that's where
Hmm.
we go to work again. It's not that our job is done when the closing hits. Now, okay, what servicers can I help with? Bringing in those bids. And it's just a terrific compliment to what we do when we have created relationships that we're confident about, right?
Hmm.
I know that when I refer my buyers to you, I know the type of work that you're going to do. And it just this this industry can be tough. And so you want to make sure that nothing is falling by the wayside because of the type of work that we're doing. So it's a great relationship to be able to help folks with.
Yeah, I love that. So, what would you then say to our listeners, the takeaway from this question, from a move up ready or move in ready house to a fixer upper?
Absolutely. I think the ability for us to clarify what kind of budget is going to take for the particular home that you need, the type of upgrades, if you're considering that side, and putting a dollar value and a cost to that. Understanding the personality of the individual. What kind of risk are you willing to take on? We did a kitchen remodel last year and we gutted the whole main floor of our house. That was interesting.
Hmm.
But we knew going into it what kind of project that was going to be. And there were surprises along the way, regardless of how long, we go with, how long we've been doing this. There's surprises that happen, but having individuals that can take care of things that come up. So the takeaway is aligning yourself as a buyer with professionals that have the staff and have the servicers that can give you the correct information to be able to make that decision.
Hmm. Yep. And that's important. And I don't know if a lot of people truly understand that that's really our job, is to obviously help people get into homes, help people sell and so forth. But you want to find someone that not only does a great job with doing that, because that's kind of the core of what we do, but also having the resources to help that person make great decisions as they move into their next house or first house. So let's switch gears and let's now talk about the seller, because I think this is an interesting play with today's market. So, what would you say? When does it make sense, Brian, when a seller should consider investing in upgrades versus sell as is?
Absolutely. So we're in for the majority of the market, a buyer's market, right? You and I experienced talking April of 2022, in which we had a shift in interest rates. And so it changed the culture as far as what we had experienced of putting a home on the market on Thursday and going under contract on Sunday. And so we're in a
Or Friday?
completely different, yeah, very much so, and going through 20 or 30 different offers on one
Uh-huh.
property, right?
Yep.
And appraisal waivers and all the things. And now we're in a market in which folks realize that they have a good amount of time that they can take to make those decisions. And so, as a seller, what is our objective? What's our goal? Our goal is to entice those buyers. Our goal is to be competitive with the other active properties that are in that particular neighborhood. And so what I do is I come in and I look at those comparables and I say, these are the things that have been done to the houses that surround you. This is your competition. And as long as it's consistent with the active properties, we can then model what our game plan is going to be based off of those comparables. And so in one neighborhood, it might be that we need to remodel the kitchen and the bathroom countertops. One particular story in Superior, they're moving out of town and they had confidence in me to, let them know that these remodels were needed. Here's other active properties that have done these upgrades to the home. And they listened to me and we did the upgrades and we closed on the home. So it's tailoring what we choose to do to have the desired outcome.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And, I tend to see the appraisals that come over when a house goes under contract. If it makes it to an appraisal, there's a lot of homes that don't get past the inspection. And that's because I don't think they're getting the right information from their agent to say, we need to make these upgrades in order for us to get best price. Now, if they're willing to reduce price just to get that house sold because of all these potential inspection issues and concerns, fair enough. But I think, like just what you said there, is that the seller should consider making certain upgrades in order to get the best price. They might actually just break even, but they could also see a little bit more on actual sale price because of these upgrades or things that they needed to kind of take care of before putting on the market. It's just extremely common that if a house is sitting, it tends to be that maybe it's location, but I also can see the reason why it is sitting is because the appraisals that we do get back, it's pretty messy and they've taken numerous price cuts. They might have to give a concession and so forth. So just like you say, I think every seller should at least consider upgrades. Even if they've taken really good care of their house, they should still pay attention to some of those more fine details that an inspector might find, because you're trying to get the best price for your client, right? I mean, that's the whole thing that you as a listing agent is trying to do. And so what I'm hearing you say is that it's probably best, especially in this market, if you want to try to sell these homes relatively quick and at the close to list price, you got to consider some of these upgrades, especially if the comparables that have sold recently have also had those upgrades. Is that true?
Yes, well said. And I would add to that, the choices are still a bit more than that, in which we can sell an as is home. We can do that. The thing that has to happen is that we would need to have a price point that potential buyers see the value in that price point, right? It's the personality and the typical buyer right now, as far as, again, like we just talked about, move-in ready versus fixer upper. And so I think, there's changes that are happening in the market in which, there's not as many folks that are looking at a renovation or a fixer upper, more of a move-in ready. And so we've got to look at, what is the audience that we're trying to appeal to? But I can understand the conversation of a seller telling me, Brian, we really want to save our money for the next purchase. We want to put that money into the purchase and do upgrades. And that's fine. It's just that we need to realize that there's a certain price point to make sure that that home is going to be appealing in a certain neighborhood to entice those buyers. And so
Right.
there's a balance. And where that clarity comes again is our background and our research and finding out, me giving that price point of what an as-is property in that neighborhood sold for. And if you did the upgrades that I suggest, here is the return on what we believe those upgrades will do. And sometimes and we'll get into this, but sometimes it's a double fold, as far as maybe you're not getting 100% of your money back, but what you've done is you've created the audience and the interest of the exposure for the buyers that are considering your home.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think too, we have a lot of people that have purchased well before the pandemic. They have a lot of equity, so maybe it makes sense to sell as is because they've got that cushion, if you will, and they're okay with maybe getting a slightly less of a sales price because they're not going to have to worry about those upgrades. And like you say, that's not a bad thing. You can still sell homes as is. Maybe it looks to be like a very good deal to the buyer too. But I do know that those that had purchased getting closer to kind of like that June 2022 through the next couple of years, they kind of still got caught in that, well, we just have to buy this house. We don't do inspections. It is what it is from an appraisal standpoint. And now they're wishing, shoot, wish I would have gotten that kind of stuff, because now all this deferred maintenance I'm going to have to take care of in order to get just the house sold without me coming to the table. So there's kind of two different folks out there, that one has equity and one may not have a ton. And, again, the experts out there are going to help people make the right decision. But that's why you need to reach out to those folks to get that information.
One point I wanted to make too is folks will come in with a perception of what it means to sell a home and purchase a home, the cost that's going to be related to that. And, I think sitting down with your realtor and your lender and really getting those specific conversations, sometimes things can be handled within the negotiation, whether it's timeline or negotiation of a financial decision. Areas of what I bring to the table as far as I'm staging the homes and I'm taking care of that, as far as I do that for all of my listings, pictures that are taken. There's certain costs that I take on because I know that we're in a certain market that we need to do everything we can to appeal to the potential buyers. And so I just want to make the note that when folks have a perception of what it's going to take, dial in, take the time and find out exactly what it really means to be able to sell a home and purchase a home. It just might be a little different than what you think.
Yep. So the takeaway, and I'll let you answer it, but it seems like you can still sell homes as is. You don't necessarily need to do a lot of the upgrades, but you need to have a understanding that you just may not get the list price. You might have to negotiate down in order for that buyer to find that house to be a good deal, because they know that they might have to put some of that stuff into it. Versus you might just want to put a few dollars into it because I think that's going to show better and we're going to get more buyers, which could create competition. And therefore it might actually get you your list price, if not higher. Agreed?
Absolutely. And, when we're talking about what type of upgrades to do, that was a bullet point that we were discussing earlier. There are certain buyers that want to have certain things taken care of, whether they're, kitchens or bathrooms or landscaping. One of the other conversations we would have is tailoring it to the neighborhood and to the buyers, right? We might not do the same things in a 55 plus neighborhood, right? Making sure that there are the types of upgrades that I would recommend are going to be tailored to the type of neighborhood that we're in, right? You're going to have a 55 plus neighborhood in which landscaping is going to be a big deal. Maybe there's a zero-scape situation that they're going to be really interested in, so that maintenance isn't going to be something that they have to take on. So we tailor the type of upgrades. Naturally, kitchens and bathrooms are going to be a big portion. I call it a wow factor, right? There's a lot of folks that come in and they're like, the feel that I get of the upgrades that have been done is the motivating factor. You might have other personalities in which they're more focused on the dollar value of the upgrades, meaning this person might love the fact that the AC unit or the HVAC has been completely replaced and the roof is fairly new. Those are large ticket items that have been taken care of, that another individual is going to hold that much more as a much more important thing that has been taken care of for them to make that decision and feel comfortable to move on. And so I've had those conversations with my sellers to say, this is what we should consider in this neighborhood that I'm seeing as far as the solds and the current actives on the property.
Well said. Well said. Yeah. I think and sometimes buyers, they don't want to necessarily have the seller do the upgrades because they want to kind of make it their own home. So again, yep, gets back to motivation, and that's, if you're paying attention, if you're listening to your client, you tend to know what that is and help them make the best choice. All right. So moving on to the last question, I think this could be the most important question of this episode. And, we've talked about trying to get the best list price and, the best return on investment, if you will, for our clients, which still is a top priority. But I wouldn't necessarily that this conversation is so much return on investment, because we're not really running numbers, but talk to us about when somebody does these upgrades, when somebody makes their house show really well, what is it creating? Is it really creating the best list price? I mean, yeah, maybe it is a little bit, but what does it actually create when you sit at that open house and you have one person come through for 2 hours, or if you have 30 people come through for when you're sitting there for 2 hours?
Right.
What is these upgrades truly doing?
Absolutely. So it's obviously giving me the power to negotiate, the power to have a story about the love and the attention that a seller has put into the home. And so when I have those bullet points to be able to describe what's been done, one, it gives me a better connection with the potential buyers that are coming through the open house.
Mm.
And that gives me the ability in which they're comfortable enough to give me their information, which means I can then continue the story. Some folks are represented, some folks aren't. So either their realtors are calling me and, asking more questions about the home, but that is the first bullet point that happens, with proper upgrades that have been done to a home. These upgrades in this market, when I'm making these recommendations, I realize that the motivation is to, get a good return on the money that you put into your home. I get that. But we do need to pay attention to the motivation and having proper motivation as to why you're doing it. Like you said, Neil, it's not necessarily just a return on your investment conversation. It's more of what is the amount of the audience that we are now appealing to because of those upgrades that we've done. And so that just helped me be able to tell the story of the home and ultimately be able to sell the home. But upgrades aren't the full story. In this market, it is so important to be aligned with price point. And so there's examples of, things that have been done that were correct in upgrades, but there needed to be the right price point for buyers to consider the home. Everything can be done. As I said, I staged homes. We price the home, competitively in the market. We align ourselves with the upgrades that needed to be done in the home, the professional photography that's been done on the home. All of these things that I've experienced, and we're doing everything correctly. And then we're promoting, the homes out in the public and social media and our relationships there. And so the exposure is correct. All of these
Hmm.
things can be done, but sometimes it comes down to whether or not you're priced correctly.
Hmm. Yep. Yep. And I think, the stats from DMAR, it clearly states that. It says that if the home is well taken care of, it's in good location. I mean, there's obviously some things about it, but if it sells within the first 15 days, typically the sales price is 99% or higher. And if it sells after 15 days, meaning that it's just sitting on the market and so forth, we start to see that list price fall all the way down to about 94%. And then you're also maybe giving up some monies for concessions and so forth. And that maybe had everything to do with if you would have just maybe done a few of the upgrades that the agent had suggested, the place wouldn't have sat. Because I think what I was getting at is that if the house is in okay shape, you put it on the open house, you do an open house and you don't get a lot of buyers, well, that's going to be tough for that house to probably get sold in a relatively short time frame. But if you've got this great looking house, great looking lot, good location, the current owners have taken really good care of it, it's going to create buyers. Buyers are going to look at that on Zillow or whatever site that they're looking at. They're going to talk to their agent. The agent's going to say, "Hey, we got to get there quick. This will probably go fairly fast." That's kind of even a better return on investment because now you're not having to necessarily worry about did I did I get my money back on that bathroom upgrade or some of the other deferred maintenance kind of stuff. Maybe you got a sales price over list price, and that can still happen in today's market. It just means that the sellers have to participate a little bit more than they used to back in during the COVID days when homes, like you said earlier, were just literally flying off the shelf.
Right. Yeah. It's, I've experienced multiple markets and, one being very honest with your sellers and giving them the opportunity to understand what their comfort level is due to the information. And so, that's what we can provide. And there are folks that, they need to experience, whether or not a certain price point is going to work. Right.
Hmm.
And there are methods to be done in which if we price a home at a certain point, and the public is now starting to give us their truth, there's a certain amount of time frame that we need to pay attention to. And we have to be very proactive in the repositioning of the price moving forward so that we're not chasing it down, so that we're not worrying about a negative perception of that property going down, because then a house sits on the market and people start to think it's overpriced. There's something wrong with the property. Why isn't
Mm-hmm.
it selling? Even though we just happen to be in a market in which buyers typically are just taking longer to make those decisions because they have
Yep.
the choice of inventory, right?
Yep. 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 So
So it really comes down to making sure that, we are giving them advice of what we've lived. This is advice that's coming from the experience that we've had, for a couple decades now.
mhm.
And so we we always want to sell the home for the highest price we can, but also we got to pay attention to the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Is the
Yeah.
goal, the ultimate price, or is the goal getting into the next home that fits your lifestyle today?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a complemented conversation with you about what does that mean for the next purchase, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're living in the
Mm-hmm.
monthly payment. And while we might not get the price point that we want on the sale, well, what kind of price point do you think you're going to get on the buy? You're going to get a discounted price point
Yeah.
if you're
Better.
buying in Colorado, if you're in the same market,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the takeaway on this question is easy. It's if you're willing to put some, fix the deferred maintenance, if any, and maybe make a few upgrades, you're creating buyers. You're actually finding folks that are kind of just dipping their toe in the water, kind of sitting on the fence, the sidelines, if you will. And all of a sudden they look at this and say, let's go take a look at this. I mean, that's what you're creating for your client if they were to take some of your advice on getting that house ready to be sold as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And, I can give you a couple examples, right? Talking about, something that worked out well versus the process of how we went down, if you'd like me to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So, in a particular home that I put on the market, everything was done correctly. The upgrades that had been done to the home were top notch, professional construction company, and they did the upgrades in the areas that appeal to the majority of what I believe to be the largest audience that would consider that home. Mind you, they didn't do these upgrades for that audience. They did it for their own personal pleasure of the home. It just happened to align itself with upgrades that I believe were correct. The staging was top notch, the professional photography, the advertising into social media and different mediums that we reach out to make sure, our relationships in the industry, everything was done. However, it still came down to price and making sure that you're aligned in the conversation with your sellers, and being honest with them and saying everything else has been done and the public has spoken. And it's great when you have sellers that then listen to you, but it was a circumstance in which they needed to know whether or not a certain price point was going to get under contract first. But they also listened and they repositioned the price within a certain time frame that didn't create a negative perception of the home. And then we
Mm,
got it under contract at a different price point because that then appealed to the market. And by the way, we got it under contract and then there were multiple offers. And so then I went to work making sure that every one of those buyers understood the opportunity of the home. And that's when our communication is key. That's when
yeah.
making sure that they understand the fantastic opportunity of the home that they're getting at a discounted price point in my opinion, but we are paying attention to the market. So
Hmm.
there are huge advantages when our clients, ourselves are aligned and we're at a high level of communication so that they can make those correct, timely decisions so that we have some progress and we have a nice outcome like we did.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. That's
Another
that's great.
situation that had happened is, yeah, I'll explain the other side to that is folks that are taking into consideration their own financial responsibilities and respectfully when you align your decisions as to where you price a home because of your own financial responsibilities, there's that alignment isn't there because the market has its own truth, right? And so house sat on the market. All of those other things were taken care of as far as the photography and the advertising and all that. And the house sat, and we ended up taking it off the market. And so I indicate that because, there are real life ramifications of, not getting a house sold, when we haven't made certain choices, to make sure that it's appealing to the public.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that's a tough one because if you're trying to align it for you versus the market, I don't know if that's a winning solution in any regards. I think, like you say, you got to align it for the market, and hopefully it works out for you from a financial standpoint. Because if you're just really trying to sell it based off of what you need, I think it's going to be hard in this market. The market could be definitely could be completely different, but well, that's great. Well, I'm hoping that our listeners were able to understand, first from a buyer's perspective, what that means from a move-in ready to a fixer-upper, the difference between that type of buyer, and then shifting over to the seller. Does it make sense to put in those upgrades? I think, we could say, yes, it does. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't sell a house as is, because that house could be very well taken care of and maybe there isn't any upgrades that are necessary. But it seems like putting some upgrades into a house in this market can help it sell quicker, and get more of a higher list price